to episode 2 of the Or Books podcast. We're here with Behrooz Ghamari, who's written for Or before and is the author of Or's newest book, The Long War on Iran. Behrooz is the former chair of the Department of Near Eastern Studies and the former director of the Center for Iran and Persian Gulf Studies at Princeton University. And he's a longtime scholar of Iranian history and politics. Behrooz, it's great to have you.
Thank you so much.
What was the news that happened this weekend, and what's been going on in Iran?
Well, first, thank you for this conversation. Today and yesterday actually has been very hard because, as many of you know, there was massive bombing of oil refineries in Tehran, in southern Tehran, in northern Tehran, and the entire city actually is covered with dark clouds, and acid rain is falling on people, and rivers of fire are going through the city, and it's very hard to witness that, and at some point I feel like any kind of analysis of what's going on at this point is irrelevant, because all those things that we feared for many years now is unfolding in front of our eyes, and this is a true catastrophe, not only for Iranian people, but also now as the war is spreading all over the region, we see that in addition to people losing their lives, infrastructure being destroyed, the fear of an environmental disaster is looming. As it's happening in Tehran at this point, and with the attacks on some of the refineries in the Gulf states, and possibly a war in the Gulf, which more than 20% of the oil of the world oil consumption goes through. I'm just afraid with any kind of spills, the entire Gulf ecosystem is going to be destroyed. So these are real concerns, and we always study these topics and forewarn people that these issues might happen. But now that it's happening, it's very hard to come to terms with. And I have many friends in Tehran and different parts of Iran, and it makes it a little bit difficult to remain analytical at this point. And hopefully we can have a conversation about the book, but I wanted to sort of preface it with that kind of state of mind that it's becoming more and more difficult for me to remain coherent and focused on what's happening because of the calamity of what is going on in Iran at this point.
The book is a collection of your writing over the past several decades about Iranian domestic politics and how the U.S. media and international media and governments have viewed the Iranian government. And I'm wondering why did you decide to publish this collection now?
For many decades, and one can argue from the right after the Iranian Revolution, the relation between the United States and Iran, and by extension with Israel, has been very challenging. Of course, I don't want to say who said what first and who's responsible and who's accountable for this, but the fact that Iran was invaded by Saddam Hussein in 1980 and at the time, Saddam Hussein was a client state of the Soviet Union. For many people who listen to this might not remember even the Soviet Union, but despite that, there was a sense of a consensus around the world that the Iranian Revolution had to be contained, especially since the claim of the leadership of the revolution was that they intended to export the revolution. Now there are different debates about how they were planning to export that revolution. Some people say that this was basically a matter of inspiration for other countries. Some people say that no, they actually wanted to export it by arming resistant groups. But that's still a question that needs to be debated. But during that time, the US, the French, the Germans, the Soviets, the British, they all supplied Saddam Hussein with arms and intelligence to defeat Iran during this war that took 8 years. And if Iranians, I always thought that if Iranians think that the US is hostile to them, and the Americans thought that Iranians are hostile to the US, but the side that actually took very practical steps to show that hostility always has been the US. Because Iran is, for the most part, stayed at the rhetorical level. The US and Israel entered a very practical operations. So the title of the book, The Long War on Iran, is a reference to that long decades of American-Israeli plots to first contain the Iranian Revolution and then to overthrow the regime. And of course, when I say that, it doesn't mean that the Iranian regime was free of any kind of oppressive and repressive policies inside the country. No, I mean, this was a regime that consolidated power very early on by eliminating all dissident voices. Many people were executed. There are up to 6,000 to 7,000 of people were executed in the first 3 years of the revolution, post-revolution. Draconian measures were taken to limit civil liberties in Iran. Patriarchal laws were passed. But all of these issues, I believe, had no bearing on the US or Israeli policies on Iran. At no point or no moment, Israelis or Americans defined their hostility towards Iranian state because of their social, political, and cultural policies in Iran. The main issue for them was the question of sovereignty of the Iranian state. Because before the revolution, Iran was known as the policeman of the region. Iran had the fifth largest military in the world. Iran was number one consumer of American arms. Iran was number one provider of energy to Israel. And all that ended with the Iranian Revolution. So the basic premise of all these pressures from the US and Israel was to sort of turn the clock back to the time that Iran played that role of protecting American and Israeli interests in the region. So I think that we always need to decouple the repressive policies of the state with the reasons that the US and Israel show hostility towards Iranian government.
And the reasons that they justify that
Oh,
hostility.
absolutely. I mean, they're instrumentalizing the question of human rights and civil liberties in Iran to justify their aggression against Iran. So when I am critical of their aggression, I am not obviously endorsing Iranian government's policies, internal policies, But these are all sort of issues that are being instrumentalized by the U.S. and Israelis to justify their very aggressive policies against Iran. And we see that for especially since 2003, which is sort of the beginning date of these essays in this book. I chose that 2003 because that's the sort of post 9/11 kind of change in U.S. policy and the real plan for redrawing the map in the Middle East. First by overthrow of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and then the invasion of Iraq, and at the time you can see in the book the first piece in the book is dated 2004. That famous expression in the U.S. Military circles that the boys go to Baghdad, real men go to Tehran. And it was very clear at that point that in the aftermath of 9/11, Iran became the main target of redrawing the Middle East map. And so there is then Iranian nuclear technology, and this is in so many different ways that was the frame in which the pressure was put on Iran and so on and so forth. But this is pretty much the reason I sort of chose that date from 2004 to present time, was that sort of the aftermath of 9/11 and how the U.S. and Israeli policymakers decided to actually redraw that map after that point.
Reading this collection of contemporary at the time essays is kind of a tracing of how the U.S. and Israeli governments, just the language they were using from the beginning. And it's really, I think we all know that the U.S. was calling Iran part of the axis of evil, but reading that in the context of what you were writing at the time is really astounding. It's to call an entire country that it's...
No, it's chilling, no?
Yeah.
I mean, that's because the essay in the book from 2004 is titled, Are the U.S. and Iran on collision course? Now, more than 20 years later, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And because this was, at the time, it was very obvious that the main target of war on terror was Iran. Some people remember the fall of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which happened immediately after 9/11 in 2001, a few months later. All the American advisors, military advisors, the generals, the State Department, there was a conference in Bonn in Germany that they were trying to talk about the reconstruction of Afghanistan with the Iranians in the meeting. And the American delegates were very clear that without Iranian help, the U.S. could not topple the Taliban in Afghanistan. So Iran actually sided with the Americans for overthrow of the Taliban, and they were extremely sympathetic towards this project of destroying that kind of Islamic fundamentalist terror networks, because they were also victims of that. And this is the time that Iran was governed by a very reformist, open-minded President Khatami. And the reformists in Iran invested in this project, that if we show that goodwill and show that we are serious about uprooting this kind of networks of terrorism, then the U.S. would stop their hostility towards Iran. All was good. And then, only a few weeks before the State of the Union, where George W. Bush suddenly said that Iran is a part of the axis of evil. Yeah. So from the conference in Bonn, that Americans are thanking Iran for helping to topple the Taliban, to the State of the Union address that Iran becomes the axis of evil, you can imagine that the effect of that for any kind of reconciliatory overtures on the Iranian part to the Americans. That I truly believe that State of the Union was the last straw that broke the back of the reformist movement in Iran. Because the reformists kept promising that we could find a way to change the political tone and to find a way to have an understanding. And they gave the Americans a very attractive proposal to reestablish relations with the United States. But the answer that came from the US was, you are the axis of evil. So that led to the collapse of the reformist government in Iran, and more militant government followed, and the rest is in the book. That you see that how all these things unfolded after that.
That's a theme that comes up a lot, that these like reformists in Iran, or some kind of change that the US was purported to be supporting, was undermined by the US itself in the way that it would talk about Iran also as this blanket country of people who were not worth
like a country
with.
Of fanatics, you know. And if you actually look at what happens in Iran, it's not only that all these changes were happening on the top, that the state decides to do X, Y, Z, but a lot of these decisions were forced by the civil society, because civil society in Iran is so vibrant. And I'm so sorry, when I say is, it just shakes my entire body that where is that civil society now, But used to be so vibrant, different kinds of associations in society, very vibrant publishing world in Iran. I always thought that if I die and there is a heaven that I want to go to, that I want that heaven to be the bookstores in front of Tehran University, because there is a 5 blocks, city blocks of only bookstores, and you just go look at these books. Every single book that comes here in the U.S. Is translated within 6 months to 1 year in Farsi, and it's available in bookstores. A very vibrant publishing world, a very vibrant intellectual networks, incredibly active women's movement in Iran, and student movements, labor movements, and that space, at least from early 1990s, was something that determined the direction of the country. Again, there's a state there with its own policies, and then there is a society that of people who have a very clear idea of the meaning of the right of self-determination, right? And I always say, and in the book I also write about this, it was possibly the most important legacy of the revolution. It offered people that kind of subjectivity, that kind of consciousness, that there isn't anything they can't do. And they have to create an environment in which they can pursue things that they believe that needs to be realized in their lifetime. So that idea of the right of self-determination was very, very strong in Iranian society. And that's why, the reformist movement was both a movement that was shaping at the level of the state, but also a movement that was encouraged and pushed forward from the bottom by these kind of civil activist institutions. Anytime that you see these attacks on Iran as a totality that you mentioned, that Iran always appears as a totality, a kind of a dark totality of fanaticism, without any kind of differentiation, without any kind of understanding of so many different ways people experience life in that country. And then it's very interesting that when these moments of hope emerge in Iranian society, we see more and more pressure from the outside. That, like I was doing a study of position of countries in the region during the reformist presidency of Khatami, the most vicious attacks that Israelis were doing were during the presidency of Khatami, the reformist president. Because I believe neither Israel nor the US wants to see a meaningful alternative to that kind of world order in the region emerge in Iran. And they did whatever they could to torpedo these moments of hope. So that's where we are now. And when I say that this war basically ended a long period of war on Iran and turned that war into a reality, I think the most important casualty of this war is the destruction of that civil society that I talked about, that was sort of generating so many new ideas, so many new ways of thinking about life, and that kind of realization of the right of self-determination in civil society. Of course, there is another level of right of self-determination at the state level, because that's the question of sovereignty. I mean, the state also wants to claim the right for self-determination through being a sovereign state and not being a client of the Americans or Israelis, or execute policies that fulfills the interests of Americans or Israelis in the region. They want to make sure that decisions are made in the halls of power inside the country rather than anywhere else.
When you talk about the totality of how Iran is seen or portrayed from the US, you have a section where you write a lot about women and the hijab, and how the US has this obsession with the hijab as a symbol of oppression, when in fact in Iran women's participation in civil society has expanded, and maternal mortality rates have dropped. And I found that also interesting, that it's sort of the symbol, the shortcut of to represent an entire regime, when actually the reality is quite different.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. That again, I think one of the most disastrous policies after the revolution was the imposition of mandatory hijab. Of course, the fear always was that if we have this mandatory hijab, it means that it would limit women's mobility in society, and it would push women back to their homes, and whatever gain women have made before the revolution would be destroyed. And that was a very legitimate fear, and people thought that might happen. But as a sociologist, I always think about actually more lasting consequences of any policy are the unintended consequences. And it turned out that the imposition of hijab allowed many families, traditional families, especially in smaller towns, especially in rural areas, to have a level of trust in society to allow their daughters, their sisters, their wives to go out in public. And again, that was totally an unintended consequence of that policy. And the state also was very much aware of this question of the significance of women in rebuilding the country after the revolution. Yes, there were patriarchal laws. Yes, the women did not enjoy equal rights. There was gender inequality in law. But again, I go back as a sociologist, we learned that what happens in society in practice is very different from what the letter of the law says. People always find ways to assert themselves in so many different ways that are not anticipated. And the problem in the West always was that there was a kind of very crude understanding of the question of hijab, that hijab always was equal, or perhaps still is equal to oppression and lack of mobility. And we see the example in Iran, as you mentioned, that this was not what happened. And women, the percentage of women students at university is 60% in Iran. It's 60 to 40. Actually, 10, 15 years ago, some of the conservatives in the Iranian parliament introduced a legislation for affirmative action for men, because they see that that was a year that 65% of students were women and 35% were men.
I think in the US it's like 55 women. Yeah. It's even less than Iran.
And if you actually in the US, if you go to STEM fields, the percentage is so low. Yeah. I think it's around like 20% women in STEM fields. In Iran, it's 50-50 in the STEM fields. Why that happened is an interesting question. I don't want to get into that why exactly this happened, but the main point is that this kind of Western liberal feminism that equals hijab with oppression and repression and lack of mobility really did not unfold in Iran. That was a totally different kind of outcome of that policy.
And in many ways it enforces the whole criticism of lack of agency by saying that women don't often have a choice in wearing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not endorsing the compulsory hijab policy, and as we see in the book, I have 2 or 3 chapters on that we see that this was after 4 decades of struggle. Finally, they reached a point that they accepted the state. I mean, when I say they, the state accepted after long periods of struggle to allow a de facto abolishment of hijab in Iran. Many people were killed during protests against this compulsory hijab policy. But at the end, I don't think that any state would ever admit mistakes, including the Islamic Republic. They never want to admit they were defeated by a social movement, But then, instead of that, they say, okay, let's not talk about it, and de facto we are not going to enforce it, And the parliament reintroduced a legislation for reinforcing the hijab, and the president said that, well, okay, but I'm not going to enforce it. People can go out with whatever form of dress that they wish. Again, it's so unfortunate that all the war is happening at the time that a lot of massive changes were happening in Iranian society.
Yeah.
Many people, after years of kind of despair, were sort of little by little trying to see some possibilities of change. And all these possibilities those hopes are dashed at this moment.
You, in some of your essays, make the point that often human rights are used as an excuse for kind of imperialist or military invasion by the U.S. and Israel, when the reality is that intervention more often than not makes things, or if not always, makes things worse for people who are dissidents or kind of marginalized in some way.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I don't think anyone who is honest would think that concerns for human rights in Iran are sincere on the part of the US or Israelis. Because let's not forget, I mean, if Israelis are concerned about human rights, let's first see how they treat the Palestinians. You know, a genocide state does not have any claim for respect for human rights. Let's look at what's happening inside the United States. An administration who basically very explicitly talks about no respect for civil liberties. Look at one legislation after another in the US. Transgender people, about immigrant rights, about you name it, you know, in the US. Or if they are sincere about human rights, I would believe them if they pressure their own friends like Egypt or Saudi Arabia or UAE or Bahrain or Kuwait to respect human rights. You know, if you can't lean on your friends to respect human rights, I would be very, very skeptical of your pressure on your enemy to respect human rights. You know. So let's not forget that Egypt now has up to, I mean, I don't know exact numbers, but between 100 to 140,000 political prisoners. You know, massive killings of opposition after the coup in Egypt by General Sisi. Nobody is crazy about human rights record of Saudi Arabia. And then, you know, of course, the question of the massacre and genocide of Palestinians, which is very relevant to this moment, because I think that was a test run, you know, a painful destruction and annihilation of an entire region with its people in Gaza, and now we see the repeat of that in Tehran. You know, do they care about human rights? I do not think so. And do they care about having access to Iranian resources and a failed state in Iran? So Iran is basically trying to manage a failed state and a civil war. Yes, that's the policy there. So I have been and remain very, very skeptical of any claims of civil liberties and defense of civil liberties and human rights on the part of the US or Israelis and their allies. You know, look at the Europeans. You know, today France and Bahrain are introducing a legislation to condemn Iran in the United Nations for attacking the Gulf states. I mean, the absurdity of it is so profound that it would leave you speechless. You know, so that's where we are.
This is a war where it seems that the majority of the U.S. public does not support this bombing, or war. And I'm wondering if you notice any differences in how the war is being portrayed in media or the news this moment versus in the past.
You know, the U.S. media like many Americans, they are true believers as the U.S. being a benevolent force in the world. It's hard for them to admit that the U.S. does not have the right intentions, you know. And when they cover these wars, if you look at, for example, the New York Times, Washington Post, major newspapers, the media coverage of the war, both, you know, the 12-day war in June 25 and the current war, is a very careful, choreographed way of reporting. Iran always appears as the aggressor, and the US is trying to contain them. And the question, even when Democrats talk about this, and the coverage that they get in the media, is about the logistics of the war. The logic of the war is not questioned. The logistics of the war is questioned. Even with the genocide in Gaza, the number one lesson that you learn in journalism, to write in active voice, is turned around to a completely passive voice. 200 people were killed in Gaza. It's not quite clear who killed them. Or sometimes they don't even say killed. They say that 400 die in Gaza. Like, who is doing it? There's almost never a subject that is committing the atrocities. And that's very purposeful. And then when, for example, they're reporting the number of casualties, Hamas-controlled health ministry says 250 people were killed.
They did that for Iran too, I think.
For Iran as well. I mean, this is like every time they do that, because that qualifier suddenly is supposed to generate skepticism, right? Because how could you trust an institution that is affiliated with Hamas? How can you trust a report that is coming out of Iranian news agencies? So they put it there to create some kind of skepticism about the validity of the report, you know. These are, you know, sometimes very explicit, sometimes wrong reports, sometimes not covering the reality, sometimes very kind of subliminal kind of messaging by these passive sentences that are quite effective, I think.
Your kind of tracking of this continuous warning that Iran is right on the cusp of developing nuclear bombs since the 80s, and how that claim is just treated as fact.
That's right.
By media outlets.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first time, I think it's in the introduction to the book, the first time that Netanyahu claims that Iran is weeks away from building a nuclear bomb is 1994. In 1994, Netanyahu says that Iran is weeks away. I think that, you know, this should be the longest few weeks in world history, you know, like after 30 years, you know, like when does this few weeks end, you know? Iran is 2 weeks away, Iran is a week away, Iran is 2 months away, I have to stop them. And that's the interesting part, that if I have access to intelligence reports as a scholar, I'm 100% sure that the media has access to those intelligence reports. But why don't they cover it? There is clear intelligence reports from 2003 by the CIA that concludes that Iran abandoned its weaponization program in the nuclear enrichment program. 2003. And there is absolutely no evidence that they've ever restarted that. Okay, you know, if your own intelligence is telling you that, but, you know, you use that as a propaganda, as that to create doubts, you use these kind of assertions which are totally baseless, you know. Last week, the American negotiator said that the reason we had to attack Iran was that we had credible report that they're restarting their military weaponization of enrichment program. The reporter doesn't ask, but didn't you say that the U.S. totally obliterated Iranian nuclear capabilities in June? I mean, how can you sort of reconcile the two parts of this, you know? But the media is very complicit in sort of that kind of reporting that gives some level of legitimacy to this kind of aggressive policies toward Iran.
I imagine you started curating this book many months ago, and I'm curious, given this recent war, renewal of war, does it make you think differently about the essays that you selected, or are there essays you wish you had selected, or
I tried to sort of select essays that could come together in sort of different parts of the book. That actually people at ORbooks helped me to sort of rethink how to put these essays together. I wanted to discuss the power structure in Iran, so people have some familiarity with how this state apparatus operates in Iran. I wanted to have definitely some parts on civil society and social movements and protest movements in Iran, so the reader can have some sense of what I was talking about earlier and how vibrant this civil society is in Iran. And also a section that has sort of addresses U.S.-Iran relations and the domestic politics of the U.S. to show the link between what goes on in American society and with Iranian politics. So these are basically the way I decided to put together these essays together. I think there are maybe 26, 27 essays in the book. It really pains me that the book came out exactly at the time that the actual war started. Intellectually, I always thought that a war between the U.S. and Iran is quite possible. And because the evidence was there. But at the human level, in my guts, I had this kind of hope that couldn't happen, you know, because it's one thing to believe analytically something might happen, but you know, emotionally, to sort of try to hold on to something that you're wrong, you know, that's not going to happen, because I knew when it happens, it was going to be so bloody and so catastrophic, and this is what's going on at this moment. But unfortunately, again, I mean, the book came out around this time that this war actually happened, and I'm glad the book is out so we can have these conversations. But I'm so sort of sorry that these conversations are being generated by an actual war that is happening out there. There is a very strong sense of paralysis at this moment because things have changed so much in the past few years, beginning with the genocide in Gaza. I think it's just sort of genocide in Gaza introduced a fundamentally different form of politics and different form of war. No limits, no boundaries. And it's so explicit. It's so extremely cruel and violent without any kind of attempt to disguise it. It always, when I was watching all these scenes in Gaza, I thought that, you know, this is like lynching, you know, because the purpose of lynching was to kill a human being and do that killing with maximum amount of suffering and forcing people to witness it. And the witnessing part was important.
The spectacle.
The spectacle of it was important. And Gaza was exactly that. It was the lynching of an entire nation. And the shocking part, we saw that on social media. The Israeli soldiers recorded their own atrocities and posted on their social media for the whole world to watch. And then, going and assassinating the political leaders, both in the Palestinian case and the Iranian case, something that is very explicitly prohibited by international law. But there is absolutely no attempt to hide it. And this is a different world. Early 1980s, Ronald Reagan tried to assassinate Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. And the plan was not successful. And they tried so hard to hide it that no, that wasn't us. But today in the newspapers, we read that, the United States is planning to assassinate Iranian leaders for months, for years. Israelis want to target Iranian leaders.
And not just the leaders, the negotiators.
These are the leaders who are negotiating, and they assassinated the main Palestinian negotiator in Tehran, during the inauguration of the Iranian president. I want to use this word shame. Shame has no place in conducting these wars anymore, and that makes it very, very hard. And that's the sense of paralysis that I talk about in the introduction of the book. And I feel it so tangibly every day now that I thought that, the responsibility of an author, the responsibility of a writer is to unpack realities in a way that they don't appear on the surface. But now everything appears on the surface. If people are not scandalized, if people are not horrified by the scenes they see, what can I say to change anything? And that's the sense of paralysis. And I want to end on that note, which is a very pessimistic note, but that's the reality we live in this moment.
Behrooz, thank you so much for speaking with me and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much.